Good evening, everyone. We're going to start. Right. It's 6:02 p.m. on September 7th, 2023. I'm Jan De Silva. I'm chair of the Community Preservation Committee here in New Bedford, and I want to welcome you to our FY24 technical workshop, where we provide all the information you ever needed to do a Community Preservation Act application. I'm here to introduce our CPA manager, Jessica Bailey, but I will be here to answer questions at the end because I'm actually a resource person. So if you have resources, I'm one of the people you need to talk to. And I hope you enjoy the meeting, and remember, we will take questions, write them down, we're happy to answer them, and no question is too short, too long. We want to make sure you have all the information you need when you leave the meeting. Thank you.
So thank you, Jan. Good morning, good evening, everybody. Like she said, my name is Jessica Bailey, and I'm the Community Preservation Act Manager here in New Bedford. So tonight we're going to do a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about CPA and then about the process, both the application process and then what happens after the application. So a little bit about CPA. For those of you who don't know, CPA was passed back in 2000. It's Mass State Law, Chapter 44B. And it allows communities to address a number of priorities: preserving open space, preserving historic sites, creating community housing, and developing outdoor recreational opportunities. The great thing about CPA is its flexibility. It allows communities to identify the needs and priorities within it and focus their funds on those needs and priorities. In New Bedford, as you can imagine, because we're such a historic city, a lot of our projects come before us are historic, with a little bit of community housing, followed by our recreation and open space. But other communities, such as up near Boston, they're really focused on their community housing. The Cape and Islands are really focused on both their open space and their community housing. But CPA allows each community to determine what they need to do with their funds. One of the other things we have to do with the CPA is we have to create a CPC. And by our ordinance, we have a 9-member body, 5 of whom represent these boards and commissions that you see here. The other 4 are at-large members. And tonight, you've met Jan De Silva. Leona Fisher is in the back. This is not one of their quote-unquote mandatory meetings, so we have like 13 meetings a year, so this is one of the ones where I say, if you can come, great. So I appreciate both of them being here tonight. The great thing about having this diversity of various points of view is that it allows us to fulfill one of the CPC's responsibilities, which is to develop a plan every year that takes into account the city's goals, needs, and priorities. Every year, the member who represents that board and commission asks to have the CPA put on the agenda, and they review the draft plan with the board or commission that they represent. And then they provide feedback to the CPC, which is then incorporated into the next fiscal year plan. That helps us to develop and maintain that plan, and that plan serves as the blueprint for the CPC when they're reviewing applications in that fiscal year, to really focus where the funding is going and to focus on the needs, goals, and priorities of our community. Another responsibility is developing the annual budget for the City Council. And then lastly, the first night of this process is tonight. It is the project recommendations to City Council. There's 2 sources of funding, for those of you who don't know. One is from the surcharge, which is 1.5%, that was voted on by the citizens of New Bedford back in 2014. That is on, the first 100,000 of every value is exempt, so it's from 101 and up that is calculated on. The other funding comes from the State Trust Fund. The State Trust Fund is funded through the Registry of Deeds fees. So obviously it fluctuates with however the market is and how many transactions take place at the Registry of Deeds. This year they're anticipating a match of 20 to 25%, which is lower than last year, but with the slowdown in the market, it was anticipated. We have to spend or set aside, based on this pie chart, 10% for each of the reserved categories. And then 65% can be spent on any of these 3 categories. As you can imagine, New Bedford has had a lot of historic preservation projects But some of them are combined, where they're historic preservation that have a component that is community housing. So having that minimum of 10% set aside allows us to know that we're going to at least invest that much in each of the 3 categories on an annual basis, provided that we get the applications for those categories. So the budgeted reserve gives the CPC the flexibility to allocate maybe a little bit more in one category versus the other, depending on the applications that are received. This year we have about $2 million in funding, and that is made up of the surcharge, the estimated match, fund balance, which is money that was not spent in a previous year. It was potentially where we estimated a lower number in the match and we received more, so that can get spent in the next fiscal year. And then we have this historic resources reserve. That is where this one is a project that didn't move forward, so that funding was withdrawn, and that $250,000 is now rolling into the historic preservation category. Typically, these bubbles would be the same amount, but because we have that roll, that's why there's a little bit more in here, and those funds can only be spent on one of those projects. Additionally, like I said, we have the budgeted reserve and the fund balance, and those 2 categories can be spent in any of those 3. So every year, we have never funded every single application, because we always have at least $250,000 to over $1 million difference between what we have to spend in allocations and what is asked for. So let's talk about projects. So I'm sure you all have ideas for your projects about what you want to do and how you want to spend CPA money in our community. The Department of Revenue created this fantastic allowable uses chart. You have all these action verbs over here and then the categories across here. So when you're thinking about your project, you just sort of, well, does my project preserve a historic resource? Yes, fantastic, it's going to be eligible. This is the chart that we use in step 1 to determine if your project is eligible or not. The reason we do a 2-step process is because the application does require some time and a lot of information. So we want to make sure that when you're applying that you are actually eligible to receive funding. So that's why the CPC, when they first started the process back in 2016 to look at how we wanted to do this, they said 2 things. They wanted to be transparent. They wanted to be as easy as possible while still gaining all the information that they need in order to make an informed decision, because they wanted to be sure that the small nonprofits run by volunteers could apply just as easily as the larger nonprofits that have paid staff. So one of the things we do is the review of the eligibility determination, and we look at, does your project fit in this chart? It's not whether or not you're going to get funding, it's just here's your next step. You can go to step 2. I'm going to review the project categories a little bit because they have a little bit of definition, and it gives you some examples so if you're not quite sure if your project fits into it. And if you have questions about your project, whether or not you think it fits into CPA, whether it's worth applying, I'm happy to discuss after this, or you can email me. I'm always available for technical assistance to the projects, both during the application phase and then during the execution of their grants. I hope to serve as a resource for you moving forward. So if you have questions after tonight, you realize when you go back and you look at something, please feel free to email me. So open space and recreation share one reserve category, but they have 2 different definitions. So open space, as you can see here, what you can do with it, whoops, wrong one. What you can do with it is you can acquire it, create, or preserve that open space. You can only rehab and restore it if it was acquired using CPA funds. In New Bedford, because we are a very urban community, most of our land is either privately owned or publicly owned, either by the city or the state. We've only done one open space project, that was the Acushnet Sawmill back in FY18. Because we did that, say in a few years, they come back and say, we really need to rehabilitate or do some restoration work, they could do that because they are open space. Because when we acquired it, it was through the open space category, sorry. So this just gives you a definition of, it's not limited, but this is just an idea of what they consider open space and what projects could be done on that. Then we have recreation. The big caveat for this is it has to be outdoor recreation. passive or active recreational opportunities. We can't do anything with stadiums or gyms, artificial turf. It can't be used for maintenance. It cannot be used for operating expenses. And in the city, we have done many projects. Every major park, Brookline, Buttonwood, Riverside, and Hazelwood all have received CPA funding, from the basketball courts at Brookline to Riverside's work with Groundworks to Hazelwood Bowling Green, as well as playgrounds at both the Campbell School with the Sergeant Sean Gannon playground, as well as the upcoming new playground at the Sergeant Carney Academy. So we also have done some work with the Friends of Buttonwood Park and the Friends of Hazelwood Park on some of their projects as well. Historic resource. As you can imagine, this is our biggest category for the most part in terms of monies spent and allocated to grants. Again, how you can spend it is here, but really right here is the most important thing. For any of you who are here who are considering putting an application in for historic resource, you either have to have that resource listed on the historic register, or it has to be determined by the local historic commission to be significant in the history, archaeology, culture, or architecture of the city. So I strongly encourage you, if you have not done so already, to email Ann Lauro at newbedford-ma.gov, right there. She is our preservation planner and assistant city planner. The next Historic Commission meeting is October 2nd. Within the next 2 weeks, you need to reach out to her and provide her with the information that she needs in order to bring that before the Historic Commission so that they can make a determination as to whether your project's resource is historically significant. You don't need that for the eligibility determination on the 27th. You will need it in November. So if you are considering a historic resource project, please email Ann. This PowerPoint is going to be online, so you can do that if you need to refer back to this at all at any point. And the last category is community housing. So community housing is defined by low and moderate income, as well as for individuals and families, as well as low and moderate senior housing. It's a little complicated. If you have a community housing project, I'm happy to talk to you offline about it because there's a lot of nuances in it. Community housing projects are very complex because they have so many different funding sources. We have done grants to, Temple Landing, Capitol Theater in the North End, 117 Union Street, Hillman Street Firehouse. So about 22% of the funds that have been allocated over the last 6 years have gone to community housing projects that also have a historic resource component. Another thing you need to think about, if you've never done this before, is that your project will have to have a preservation restriction of some kind. That's something that your board or your ownership body needs to know before they move forward. It could be an open space conservation if you have an open space project. It could be a preservation restriction. A lot of the projects that we have already have preservation restrictions in place, and that's fine. We don't put another one on. But if we're acquiring historic property, a perpetual preservation restriction is required. If it is a significant investment, it could be anywhere from a 30-year preservation restriction to a perpetual preservation restriction. But that's something that will have to be done and will be one of the funding conditions. So just keep that in mind as you're moving forward. So the plan. The plan is online. It's a PDF. It's 78 pages. I promise you it is not incredibly difficult to go through. I put a lot of pictures in it of projects so you can see past projects, which is great. But there's also a lot of information in it. And we strongly encourage you to read through the whole plan, because not only will it give you what are the city's identified goals, priorities, needs are for the city for this fiscal year, but it also gives you the criteria by which each application is critiqued by each member of the CPC. There's primary and secondary criteria, as well as criteria for each individual category. So step one, as I mentioned, it's 2 steps. It's eligibility determination. And we look at that chart that I had up earlier, and that chart really guides whether or not your project's eligible. If your project's eligible, then you get an email by October 6th saying, fantastic, your project is eligible, here's the application. If your project is not eligible, we will provide you with the reason why it's not eligible, and if we have any guidance as to how you can make your project eligible, how it could qualify under CPA, we will provide that to you. Once you get the application, you have until November 17th to pull it all together. So here's our timeline. We started tonight. I apologize for the heat in this room. It's getting a little bit better with the door open. Noon on the 27th, it is an email. You will get an email back saying, thank you so much for your submission. By the 6th, you will receive an email saying, your project's eligible, your project's not eligible. If it's eligible, you get the application. On the 17th of November, which is a Friday, by noon, you will be providing me with your application. The last few years, we have gone to a lottery system where I take all the projects on a piece of paper, throw them in a hat, and have somebody pull them out, and I put everybody in a time slot so that everyone's not showing up at 11:59. And it's worked fairly well. The bonus is that if you're one of the earlier slots, you get to choose which night you do your presentation in June. So the earlier you come, the more likely you could get a time and date that works for you in January. I'm sorry, not June. Next up, you do a presentation in January. I call it the 5-minute elevator speech. It's basically an opportunity for you all, and by the way, this is all Zoom. From October through February, it's all Zoom. It's an opportunity for you to say, here's our project, here's why it matters, here's how it relates to the plan, here's what urgent needs it fills. It then gives the CPC the opportunity to ask questions they may not have answered through your application, clarification, anything of that nature. And then it's a time where your supporters can speak in favor of your project. It's also a time when the public can speak against your project. So it gives the CPC an opportunity, it gives you an opportunity to talk about your project directly to the CPC, gives the CPC the opportunity to have their questions answered, and gives your supporters or opponents opportunity to speak as well. After that, so that's over 3 nights in January, and then there's 3 additional meetings at which the CPC meets, scores, and reviews, and comes up with their recommendations and votes on their final recommendations to City Council. Those City Council recommendations usually are submitted in early March, go to City Council refers them to the Finance Committee, at which Jan and I appear and discuss why the CPC recommended your project. They then go and vote on them individually, and then it's sent back out to full council for their final vote. Once that happens, you get an email saying, congratulations, here's your award letter, and your grant agreement is coming soon. Please note that no funds are available until after July 1, 2024. So if your project is going to be done by next May, this is not the application for you. But if you start your project in May and it's going to run through another year, that's absolutely fine. This is the right timing for you. Who can apply? It's all about ownership. Your property owner, the non-property owner, you have to have consent from the property owner. If you don't have consent from the property owner, your eligibility determination will not be even considered. If you're a nonprofit, you own the building. If you're a corporation, if it is a project you want to take place on city property, you need to have the city be the lead applicant and have their permission to even put in the eligibility determination. So let's talk a little bit about the application. So this is the eligibility determination. It is not scary. It is literally one piece of paper, both sides. Few things you need to know. You need to be able to receive the funds. If you're not a nonprofit, or if you don't have some kind of fiscal agent that you work with, you need to find one. You have to have that site control, because right here is property ownership, and it's going to ask you, is the owner the applicant? If it's yes, great, skip this question. If it's no, then you need to say, do you have written documentation? Yes, I do. If it's no, then you're going to be deemed ineligible. You have to have site control to be doing work on a property. And then the allowable uses. I get the question a lot, can it be more than one thing? Absolutely. It can be an open space project that's going to be turned into that's going to be acquired and turned into a recreational space. Or it could be an historic resource that's going to be an adaptive reuse that's going to become similar to like the Capitol Theater, where it's going to be retail space, office space, as well as community housing. So you can absolutely put both allowable uses. It does not mean you're going to get double dips in the pot, but what it does is strengthen your application to show that you're checking off a lot of boxes in terms of the priorities and needs of the community. So, determination of historic significance, you do not need that, but you need to have started the process. Because if you don't have it by November 17th, your application will be considered incomplete, unless there's extenuating circumstances that Ann informs me of. But like I said, you need to reach out to Ann Laurel within the next 2 weeks, at the minimum. I would say the next couple days. Be sure that you know and your board knows what kind of property restrictions you may incur if you receive funding. And then lastly, please, no 8-point font. I'm not wearing my readers right now, but this box right here, as you keep typing, the font keeps getting smaller. So please, it's a 500-word count, and I'm going to help you with this. All we need to know is your project scope. We don't need to know your organization's history, the history of the building. We don't need to know how many people you serve. All we need to know is we own this building that was built in this date. We want to do X, Y, and Z to the building. That's it. We don't need to know whatever funding you have. That's all. Save that all for the main application. This is literally just the scope. If we need clarification or additional information, I will reach out to you before the CPC meets to review these. But it will allow us to focus just on your scope, keep it under 500 words, and keep the font size higher than 10. So, thank you very much for that. Just so you know, if you do not do one of these, you cannot do step 2. So even if you're on the fence about whether or not you want to do, because you're not sure, maybe this isn't the right time, but you're thinking it might be, if something falls into place, put in the eligibility determination. It is no harm, no foul if come October 6th, when we say you're eligible, you realize 2 weeks later, we're just not ready to put in an application this year. It's better suited for FY25, and you email me, it is not an issue. The CPC does not hold that against you. It is not a black mark. It is nothing. It is just a realization that you thought you were at the right place, but you're not. And that's okay. Because we'd rather you get everything in order so that when your application comes in, it's as strong as possible so it has the best chance of success. So the application. The reason we say to read the plan is because the questions on the application really refer back to the plan. So it's good to have a sense of what the CPC is looking for as you're completing your application. So complete, detailed, clear, and concise. Please watch your character counts, because again, these boxes you'll just keep typing and you'll get smaller, smaller, smaller. Look at the plan and see what kind of goals there are that your project meets. And make sure you refer to them. There's a section on a page or two that you'll see. If you're an organization that is submitting, or a department that's submitting more than one application, you need to prioritize them for us. We have some municipal departments that will submit multiple applications, and they give us a priority list. We've had a couple of organizations that have multiple projects going on, and we've asked them which one's more vital to move forward, A or B. Because as I said before, we cannot fund everything 100%, and we can't even fund all of the applications that we receive. So it allows the CPC to understand your organization's priorities while they're reviewing your application. And then application submission on November 17th. You're going to do, and it's all in here in the instructions that some of you picked up. And if you haven't had a chance, if you would sign in before you leave so I can either put you on our email list and just get a good head count, I'd appreciate it. But in the plan, at the very back, is the instructions on the application, the eligibility determination, and the application so that you can see them. But we only accept the digital copies. When you submit your application, it's going to be a flash drive with the application and all of the supporting information, and then 12 copies of only the application, double-sided, 3-hole punched. That's all we need. Everything else is going to be digital form, please. So, a few things to keep in mind. The project title, it does not need to be long. It can be short and sweet. We are good with that. Where it is, which category it's going to be, and all of that, as well as your application. One thing I didn't mention is your funding request. Back on this, up here is your budget and your estimated request. That can change. Say you think right now your project's going to be $100,000, and then you start getting your quotes in because you've been proactive. You started getting your quotes, and you're, oh dear, it's going to be 125. We really need to ask for 75 and not 50. That's fine. Those numbers can change between your eligibility determination and your application. What cannot change is this. Your determination of eligibility is based solely on this. If you change your scope, you have changed your eligibility. And in doing so, you have basically null and voided your application. So remember, you can change that. That's not a problem. Not a problem at all. And also, this number here, your ask, is going to have to be the same as the number you're going to see in a few slides. This is the checklist that you'll also see. We ask because the CPC can review anywhere from 17 to 35 applications in any given funding cycle. We ask that the flash drives are organized by these headings right here with the supporting documentation if you're providing it, because you may not have to provide everything, because not everything relates to everybody's projects. So it's in these folders so that the CPC it makes it easier for them to review, and also so that they're not thinking, oh, well, they didn't include that, when it's just named something that, if it was a whole list of documents, versus if it's in this folder, and that's where they're going to look for it. So we ask you to just organize your flash drives like that so that it makes it easier for them when they do their review, and we can be sure that they are seeing the complete application and not missing something. So the application itself, again, the boxes will keep going. Don't feel like you have to do perfect grammar. It can be a lot of shortened bullet points. That's fine too. But you need to talk about your general description of your project. What's the need and benefit? And look at the plan to see what need is identified and how your project might meet that need. What are your goals and objectives for this project? How are you going to measure the success of it? Is it going to be to deter further deterioration of a resource? Is it going to be provide additional recreational opportunities to an underserved population? All of that. Community support. Community support is important. The CPC is very aware of the fact that they are stewards of public monies. They represent our community when they are reviewing these applications. Providing letters of support, having your supporters come and speak in the Zoom call, having them send emails, all shows to the CPC the value that your project holds in the community and the need in the community. So it's kind of important if you have the ability to do that, and it does not always have to be a politician. It can be the people in the neighborhood. It can be people that you serve, because those are the people who you're doing this for. I mean, it's great if you have supportive politicians and they're actually funneling money to you from some kind of resource, like a budget or something. That's great, but it can be just the people that you serve. And what's the need? How critical is it? Is the roof falling down? Is the resource in danger of being irreparably harmed so that it would never be able to be rehabilitated or restored? Things of that nature. Or is it a piece of property that if we don't acquire it, will fall and be developed and will be lost and won't be open space anymore? Project management is more about your organization's capacity. Tell us about who you are, and you see all these bullet points in here? They're kind of prompts so you can know what you need to answer. How feasible is your project? How far are you along in any permitting process that you need? So basically, how shovel-ready are you? Because these applications, the expectation is for most of these grant agreements that you will finish your project by June 30th of 2025. So you have about a fiscal year. The only exception is community housing projects. They are given a 2-year term because of the length of time it takes for them to get all of their funding together, and then they do one massive closing, and they're not always allowed to do any work until the closing takes place, because then it prevents them from accessing other funding. It's very complicated, and it does make the process a little bit longer. So they are provided with a 2-year term versus everyone else is provided with a 1-year term. We have, over the last few years, provided term extensions for projects because due to COVID and then supply chain issues, a number of projects were not able to move forward in the manner and speed which they originally thought, so they were provided with additional time. The CPC wants to see projects succeed and be finished so that they can be part of the community's, the different services and such. This page is for category-specific projects only. If you're not doing historic rehab or have ADA requirements or community housing, ignore this page. It'll probably be blank. And then lastly, your project information. So here's where you're going to give us more detail about what funding you've received, what funding you've gone after. It is not the CPC has an expectation in that you will look for funding to the best of your organization's abilities. They realize that not everybody has fundraising capacity. Some have less than others, some have more than others. And they take that into account when they are reviewing these applications. However, the great thing about CPA is that it can be used to match state and federal funds. So if you're getting out there and you're applying for things and you are successful, sometimes you can use CPA as a match. But this is where you can provide that information. The schedule, it can be estimated because it's going to change. We know. We just want to make sure that your project timeline fits within the grant agreement timeline. And then remember the first page where I talked about the number needs to match? The number you asked for on page 1 needs to be the number here, right on this line. If you have received funding for a CPA for this project, put it on a separate line and just say FY21 and what the amount was. But keep your ask onto number 1, and then anticipated funding sources. If you've reached out and you just don't know yet, you haven't heard from a grantor that whether or not you're been successful in getting a grant application, that can be put there. And then for construction projects, if you have a construction budget that's already created, you don't need to use this. If you have questions about this, please feel free to email and call me. If you want to provide renderings, engineering plans, design bids, any specs, digital copies are great. It gives the CPC an overview of what the project is. So it does not need to be every single thing, but it's good for them to, if it's a building that's going to be built like 117 Union Street, so they could see it and they could see like the schematics of the floors, but they don't need the HVAC, they don't need any of that. It's more just, here's what we're building. And the last piece of the application is the voter corporation tax compliance certificate. The reason I added this is because this one trips up a lot of people. The name up here of who is given authority to sign needs to be different than who signs it. So Jane Doe, the executive director of XYZ nonprofit, is voted at the board that she has permission to enter into agreements, and then John Smith, who is the president, signs this. This tax compliance can either be signed by Jane Doe or John Smith, whoever in your bylaws has authority to sign. And then one quick item about procurement. So if you're doing a project that involves municipal resources, a building, a playground, something like that, first of all, the city department has to be the lead. And there will be, yes, procurement and prevailing wage laws. But most of you are going to be a private entity We're a private entity and will not have to deal with procurement and prevailing wage laws. Yay. Because procurement is a specialty on its own. But I bring it up especially because if you are working on a project that is going to be on city property, you need to know this so that you can discuss it with the department contact person that you have. So then you all submit them. On the 17th, I collect them into binders, make copies of all the flash drive, hand each of the members their binders, their scoring rubric, and their flash drives, and then they start reviewing. What are they looking for? Well, obviously we know it's eligible if it got this far, but does it have a benefit? Does it align with the plan? And is it of good use of public resources? All these questions is why we keep saying, read the plan, so that you understand what it is that is the priorities for this fiscal year. So this is how they review them. They usually start in late November, early December when I get them their packages. And also, all the applications are created, I combine everything into one PDF, and they will be on the CPC's website. I send out an email to our email list saying, hi everyone, if you want to review the applications, they're there. And by the way, here are the nights that public comments will be taken. Or you can provide us with a letter or an email if you want to speak for or against a project. Again, the open and transparent process the CPC strives for every year is to make sure we're including everybody every step of the way so that they're informed. Primary criteria and secondary criteria, and then there's category criteria. They look at capacity of the organization. They look at how shovel-ready the organization is. They look at the past experience that they've had with that organization. They look at, how much can they fund out of it? You will probably get asked the question at your presentation. So, if we can't fund 100% of your ask, can the project still move forward? The reason why is because historically, we always have a gap. And it is very, very rare that we can fund, we've never funded everybody, or even funded everybody at 100%. We're historically, on average, somewhere in the upper 70%, 80% range. So that you will probably get that question. And that public presentation, it's a great opportunity for you to talk about your project for a few more minutes. It's not really about bringing up new information, it's really bringing home the bullet points. Like, this is why it's important, this is how it meets the plan, this is the need it's gonna provide, to serve in the community. Do you have any questions? That's pretty much it, and then your supporters can talk. The general criteria, primary and secondary, that's all in the plan. Like I said, this PowerPoint will also be online if you want to refer back to it. And these are the questions that the CPC is asking themselves as they review your application, and then they go back and they score them. And they're either going to recommend for funding or not recommend for funding. They have not yet ever done accepted for future consideration. It's not something that they've done. It is something that they hold in their back pocket if they feel that it is something, if they may have future funds, but honestly, they've never had funds left over, so it's not something that they've held on to. They've usually done either recommended or not recommended. If they don't recommend it, they will typically provide me with a reason, and I will communicate that to the organization as to why they weren't recommended for funding. So, after the 3 nights of public presentations, there's 3 nights of meetings where the CPC meets. The last night they vote to recommend. And they also do funding conditions. The funding conditions are, you might need to do a restriction of some kind, preservation, open space, something of that nature. Or you might only get a portion and you wanted like HVAC and fire alarms and something and electrical. And they'll say, well, we're gonna fund your HVAC and your fire, but not your electrical. So the funding conditions will be provided to you. I will send an email to the contact person saying, congratulations, they have voted, here are your funding conditions. Please reply by X date confirming that you accept these conditions. If there's a question, we will go back to the CPC because those funding conditions are part of the submission package that goes to the City Council. We tell them how much, what's the scope, what the funding conditions are, and what category it's coming from. So we need to make sure that you're okay with the funding conditions because those are going in the submission to City Council that they vote on, and it's going into your grant agreement. So you have that opportunity to review. Excuse me. So we usually send the city council the submissions, usually late February, usually appears on the first or second meeting in March. They receive it, refer it to finance, where Jan and I appear. Our role is to advocate and answer the questions that the city council has. It's to advocate for the reasons why the CPC recommended the project. It's a little different than advocating for your project. But what we're saying is, we've reviewed them, the CPC has made these determinations that these projects should receive funding. Your job, if you're one of the submitted projects, is to reach out to your supporters and reach out to the city councilors and say, hi, we were one of the submissions. Love to talk to you about our project and why it's so important. Hope we have your support. And then your supporters too. Because the city councilors need to know that there's support out there for your project as well. That's not the CPC's role. Our role is to say, here's why you are saving this recommendation. Here's the questions. And then sometimes they ask us questions that we have to go back and get answers to, which is fine. The city council can do three things. They can approve the recommendation, they can reject the recommendation, or they can reduce the recommendation. In the 6 years we've been doing this, and the 73 grants we've given out, they have done that 3 times. We have been provided, in our ordinance, we are provided with one time where we can go back and respond, adjust the scope, answer their questions, whatever it is, before they do their final vote. All 3 times, fortunately, we've been able to satisfy their answers, satisfy their questions satisfactorily, and the funding has been awarded in full as recommended. So once that happens, you get a letter saying, congratulations, here's your award. And then we enter into the grant agreements between the city or CPC and representing the city and the organization. If they're a department, they get a memorandum of agreement, which is different. External grantees get the grant agreement. Organizations are responsible every 3 months. You must communicate with me on behalf of the CPC, either through a disbursement request, which includes a project status report, or just a project status report. You just say, this is what we did this quarter. And then a final report is due 30 days after the project completion. The funding is dispersed in phases. We write it so that it's quarterly, but we have some projects that move so quickly that they're getting monthly disbursements. Some are, we get one 6 months in, then we get 9 months, and then we get 12 months. We are flexible. We also have the ability to do an initial disbursement of up to 25% as seed money to start your project, because the CPC recognizes that not everybody has the startup cash to do their project. So they can't wait for reimbursement because they don't have any money to spend to get reimbursed for. So initial disbursement, there's reporting requirements once you get the initial disbursement before you get your next disbursement. But that is a way that we help some of the smaller organizations that may not have the resources to move their projects forward without that initial disbursement. And then recapture. This has never happened, but the solicitors tell me I have to say this, and it has to be in the grant agreement. Failure to comply with the grant agreement, you will get forfeit everything that hasn't been spent, and you'll have to pay it back. That has never happened. So, and I have faith that it will not happen, because you all work really hard at what you do to make our city better. And then funding acknowledgement. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, the CPC is very, very aware that they are stewards of these funds. It is their responsibility every year to make sure that they are presenting to City Council the best applications for the projects that are going to meet the needs, priorities, and goals in the plan and move the city forward. Not everyone in the city is a fan of CPA and supportive. Not everybody knows of the work that we're doing. They don't realize what they were doing. So we ask that the grantees help us in spreading the word about the positive impact of CPA in our community. Over $10 million has been given out in the last 6 years. $7.2 additional million in leveraged funds to date has also been spent on these projects. That's a $17 million impact in 6 years. We have done projects all across the community, across every single ward. Every single major park has received CPA funding. And everybody has seen whether they realize it or not. So what we ask of our grantees is that you acknowledge the work that you're doing and the funding source that it came from. From reports that received, this report was generously funded by the New Bedford's Community Preservation Act, to signage, to press releases, to make sure you mention us as a funder. We have these fantastic signs that we can let you borrow if you're doing construction, so that the world knows that CPA is helping create this project in our community. And if you do final, fantastic, beautiful signage like this, that you also include the City of New Bedford Community Preservation Act. Because when it all said and done, it is the community's money that is going into your project, and they need to be recognized for that contribution. So that's it. I know it's a lot. I did it faster than I've normally done it. So I know it's a lot. I think I have one more of the example of the application, but like I said, the PDF is online, so you can look at it. I will absolutely take questions. I will repeat them in case anybody, yes?
Thanks, Jessica, that was a very efficient presentation. Step 1 determination form.
Yep.
Top of page 2 to back, where it says estimated funding request. Is there an amount that would be silly to ask for? You said the pot is $2 million. Can someone ask for $2 million, or is there an amount where Jan's not going to look favorably with the request?
I will tell you that if you know that we have $2 million and you're asking for $2 million, you are not going to get $2 million. The CPC strives every year to make sure that they can fund as many projects as possible and move them forward with as much money as they can, which is why they ask that question, how much do you need to start moving? Can you come back? We are not a community like Boston that gets tens of millions of dollars. And other Boston area communities that have this very deep pot of money that they are doing 5 projects and it's $3 million each. We are a rarity in New Bedford. I belong to a group of monthly meetings where we talk, my colleagues in other communities. We are very rare in the number of projects that we fund on an annual basis and the number of applications that we receive. A lot of the communities are kind of blown away when I tell them that I'm currently overseeing 32 open projects. They haven't done 32 projects in like 10 years. So I would say, no, you probably will not get your $2 million. I would say, make the ask what you absolutely need for a phase, and then plan on coming back for another phase. A really good example of that is First Baptist Church and Capitol Theater, where they have phases. Because we can't say, here's $5 million, because we don't have it. But what we can do is this year we'll do the steeple, and then we'll do your handicap bathrooms, and then we'll help you with the fire system. We'll help you with the roof. We'll help you with the exterior windows. We can't do it all, but we can help you, and we can help you leverage other funding. Because if other funders, be it private donations where you're going to a philanthropist and saying, hey, this is a great project and look at the community backing we have, or other grantors where you're saying, look, we've gotten this money from our CPA. And especially with communities with CPA, a lot of funders are saying, have you gone to your CPA yet? So I would say, make your ask something that can help you move your project forward that's reasonable and not taking up the entire $2 million, because there's no way the CPC, unless they get one application, is going to give the entire piece to one organization. So, any other questions? I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple questions. Did you say what your budget was?
$2 million.
Okay, that's your budget. And then, do you fund churches if the project is correct and fits the criteria?
Active congregations are not eligible because of the anti-aid amendment.
Okay.
If it is not an active congregation like the First Baptist Church, which is not an active congregation, is owned by your theater in Whale, that's why we could fund that. We call it First Baptist Church, but it's really the Steeple Playhouse. I should really start calling it that. Unfortunately, Because of the anti-aid amendment, the three-prong review, churches don't pass the test, unfortunately, because we have a lot of beautiful, amazing churches in our community. There is, if you email me or call me, there is, what's it called? Preserving Sacred Spaces. Who is it? Partners for Sacred Places. If you Google Partners for Sacred Places, they have a grant program that is specifically for active congregations. Is it preservation? If you can't find it, call me or email me, please, because I know that's the one I have found, and I've spent some time looking because I've had that question, because we have so many beautiful houses of worship in our community that we would love to help with the exterior preservation because they are part of our historic resources, but because of the anti-aid amendment, we can't.
It is
Partners for Sacred Places, that is the website. I don't know what their cycle is and what their process is, but I do know that they do that. You said you had another question? Or were that the two? Okay. Okay. All right. You're welcome. Does anyone else have any questions?
I do.
Yes.
The step one application, no attachments, it's literally just this.
Yep, it's one page, front and back. Like I said.
Great. And then my second question was, could you just quickly review or recap, we were talking about having to get in touch with Ann and Laura?
Yep,
And
yep,
what exactly did
absolutely. Let's see. All right, so my only caveat with the eligibility determination is that if you don't control the property, you need to have the letter of permission from the owner. Let's see, where is she? La la la. Oh, there we go. Okay, so that's Ann's address, right there.
Okay.
So, if is it a building? Is it a resource?
It's a building.
Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to email Ann with the address and let her know, because it could be already listed on the State Register of Historic Places. It could be in a district. She would know better than I. If it's not, you'll then start the process for it to be reviewed by the Historic Commission to determine whether or not it's, architecture that's significant. I'm going to assume it's going to be the architecture that she's going to look at, or the culture.
She's just verifying that it's a correct historical property.
Correct, that it is a historic resource. So it's either going to be on the register, or if it's going to be determined. The significance is going to be determined by the Historic Commission. So, and Jan serves. She is our representative for the Historic Commission on the CPA. So you can ask her a few more questions if you want. Yeah, it's pretty much the address that Ann will need. If you email Ann the address and just tell her that you were here tonight, and.
So it's from the Whaling Museum.
Okay.
So, and I believe it's a board building, but I'll.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, they've received grants before, so Whaling Museum's fine. Yeah.
I'm new.
Nope, that's fine. It's not, because somebody else probably had the same question, so it's fine. Yeah. You're very welcome. Any other questions? I'm that good that I answered everybody's questions, or I overwhelmed you all and you have no idea what I said for the last 50 minutes. Yes, sir.
I have a question about the application. How do we submit the application?
Okay, so the eligibility determination form, that lovely two-pager, that one, if you go to the website, it's there, it's a PDF, you just click on it, download it and save it on your computer. I do not know why sometimes Adobe does this. It will if you don't download it and save it as a document on your computer, you fill it out and then you save it and then send it to me, it's a blank document. I don't know why. MIS can't answer that question for me. So, download it, save it on your computer with whatever name, fill it out, and then send it to me. If I get it and it happens to be blank and you sent it at 11:59 a.m., I will absolutely send it back to you and say, please fill this out again. It will not be considered late, because I've had that happen many times and had many panicked phone calls. So, but it's online on, there we go. No, go back, ta-da. So if you go to the City of New Bedford website, at the top, it says City Offices. click on the drop-down, you're going to see community preservation, click on that, it's going to take you right to the webpage. At the top, you'll have it'll be all the information, and the link is there for the eligibility determination form. Click it, download it, and it should be fillable. If it's not fillable, please let me know. I've tested it 3 times today. Yeah. So what Jan said, in case you hadn't heard, there's a couple of historic preservation. There's the 1772 Foundation, there's the Mass Preservation, so there's a couple. And if you're doing community housing, have you had a conversation yet about housing funding with the Office of Community Development Housing? Josh Amaral and his staff? Okay, great, fantastic, because that's another piece, especially when you're doing a project that's both historic preservation, because you're adaptive reuse into community housing, you can get both pots of money. And again, if for a project like that, it would be a 2-year term because of the length of time it takes you to get all your pieces together. And depending on your funding, like home funding, you can't spend any money until you do the environmental assessment and then you do the closing. So, that's why we give a longer term for those housing projects. So, you're welcome. Yes, sir.
So I'm doing housing also.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand what you're saying about the funding source.
Okay.
Is there any, when it comes to housing, what can we apply for? What's the maximum?
Your maximum for a CPA? Like I told the first gentleman, there's $2 million. If it's a phase, yeah, if it's a phase of like that you need like exterior restoration, then it's that portion, then that could be something where you do that one phase. But if you're doing a community housing project, I would strongly suggest you reach out to the Office of Community and Housing Development, Josh Amaral and his staff, because they may be able to provide you with some resources or some direction for the community housing component. So, okay, great. Any other questions? Okay. Well, like I said, my name is Jessica Bailey. It's jessica.bailey@newbedford-ma.gov. You can also reach me at the at cpa@newbedford-ma.gov. If you haven't signed in, if you could, that'd be great. And I look forward to getting applications from you all in the next few weeks. Thank you again for attending tonight. Have a good rest of your night.